The mind is the most powerful force that human beings have been given, and within that force lies the ability to determine whether life feels like a battlefield or a place of peace. Control over your mind is absolute power because it dictates not only how you interpret the events that happen to you, but also how you respond to them. When Napoleon Hill spoke about the fact that nothing and nobody can hurt you again once you master your own thoughts, he was pointing toward a truth that philosophers, spiritual teachers, and psychologists have emphasized for centuries. All external events are neutral until the mind labels them as harmful, beneficial, tragic, or fortunate. It is the inner interpretation that creates either suffering or strength. In this sense, the only real danger in life is to live with an undisciplined, untrained mind, for such a mind becomes a tool in the hands of fear, doubt, and negativity. When an individual develops the capacity to guard the gates of thought, they step into a realm of freedom that few ever achieve. Every insult, every rejection, every apparent setback loses its sting because the person has already decided that no one else has the authority to control how they feel. External events may be chaotic, but the inner world remains calm and grounded. Think of the person who is criticized harshly. To some, those words would shatter confidence and linger for years. To another, who has cultivated mastery over their own thoughts, the criticism registers as nothing more than noise, stripped of power the moment it reaches the ear. The difference is not in the words spoken, but in the mental fortress of the one who hears them. Control of the mind also means freedom from the tyranny of fear. Fear is often the hidden enemy behind every form of suffering. Fear of rejection, fear of loss, fear of humiliation, fear of failure. These paralyze countless individuals. But fear itself is only a creation of thought, a projection of the mind into a future that does not exist. The moment you realize that fear is nothing more than a mental picture, you weaken its grip. No matter what may happen in the external world, it cannot wound you unless your mind clings to the image of harm and amplifies it. When you remove the mind's cooperation, fear dissolves. A person with mental mastery knows this and walks into life with the unshakable awareness that even difficulties hold no real danger, only lessons. One of the most profound realizations that comes with mental control is the separation between who you are and what happens to you. Most people confuse their identity with their circumstances. When they lose money, they feel worthless. When they are insulted, they feel diminished. When they face setbacks, they believe they are failures. But when the mind is disciplined, you see clearly that you are not your possessions, not your reputation, and not your external conditions. You are the awareness that experiences these things. This awareness cannot be harmed by loss or insult, because its nature is beyond circumstance. Once you grasp this distinction, the statement "nobody and nothing will ever hurt you again" ceases to be motivational rhetoric and becomes a lived reality. Another dimension of controlling your mind is the ability to choose your dominant thoughts. The law of substitution, which Hill often referenced, teaches that the human mind cannot hold two opposing thoughts at the same time. If a negative thought arises, you can consciously replace it with one of faith, gratitude, or determination. Over time, the habit of substitution reshapes your mental landscape. Instead of dwelling on injury, betrayal, or defeat, you dwell on lessons, opportunities, and growth. The mind becomes conditioned to seek empowerment rather than helplessness. At that point, harm from the outside world simply cannot take root because your inner soil no longer nurtures the seeds of negativity. Control of the mind is not about denial or pretending that life is always pleasant. Pain and challenge will still come, but they will no longer have the power to define you or dominate your inner state. Consider the example of two people who lose their job. One spirals into despair, feeling ruined and humiliated. The other, though initially disappointed, quickly reorients their mind toward new possibilities, recognizing the loss as an opportunity to pursue something greater. Both encountered the same event, yet only one felt destroyed. The deciding factor was not the event, but the quality of mental control exercised in response. When you truly recognize that your mind is the only point of control you need, you stop seeking security in things outside of yourself. You stop expecting people to behave a certain way so that you can feel at peace. You stop relying on circumstances to give you happiness. Instead, you generate peace, happiness, and strength from within, independent of what others say or do. This is why Hill emphasized that mastery of the mind places you beyond the reach of harm. The external world can no longer dictate your internal experience. Every day presents small opportunities to practice this mastery. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and you choose calm instead of rage. A colleague undermines you, and you choose confidence instead of insecurity. A plan collapses, and you choose resilience instead of despair. With each choice, you strengthen the muscle of mental control. Over time, it becomes second nature, and the world notices that you carry yourself with a serenity that cannot be disturbed. People may even test you, hoping to see you crack, but your composure only deepens, because you have already made the decision that nobody and nothing has the power to hurt you unless you allow it. This mastery also opens the door to greater achievement. When your mind is no longer enslaved by fear, anger, or discouragement, you gain clarity of thought and persistence of action. You see possibilities that others overlook because they are too clouded by negative emotions. You act with confidence while others hesitate. You persevere while others quit. Success begins in the mind, and by controlling your mental state, you place yourself in alignment with the very forces that bring opportunity and growth. Ultimately, control of the mind is absolute power because it liberates you from being a victim of life. The world may continue to present challenges, but you meet them from a place of strength, not weakness. You no longer give anyone else the permission to define your worth, your happiness, or your peace. The moment you assume this control, you step into a life where harm becomes impossible, because every event, no matter how difficult, is filtered through the unshakable strength of your own disciplined mind. Pain does not exist in events themselves, but in the way the human mind reacts to those events. This principle, which lies at the heart of Napoleon Hill's teachings, reveals that no circumstance or person can inherently wound you. What creates suffering is the interpretation you give to what happens. Two people can experience the same event, yet one feels devastated while the other grows stronger. The difference lies not in the event, but in the reaction. Understanding this truth transforms how you live, because once you realize that suffering is born from perception, you reclaim the power to choose whether or not to be hurt. When something happens in life, a betrayal, a financial loss, a failure, the immediate instinct is to believe the pain comes directly from the event itself. Yet events are neutral. They have no inherent meaning until the mind assigns one. Imagine rain falling during a wedding. To one person, it is a tragedy that ruins the day. To another, it is a blessing symbolizing abundance and cleansing. The rain is the same, but the reactions are vastly different. The one who suffers does so not because of water falling from the sky, but because of the interpretation that the rain is harmful. Once you grasp this, you realize that almost nothing in life has the power to hurt you unless you give it meaning that wounds you. This principle also explains why some of the most resilient people in history were able to endure tremendous hardship without being broken. Prisoners of war, survivors of great loss, and leaders facing immense adversity often speak of a mental shift where they stopped seeing events as punishments and started seeing them as challenges or lessons. The event did not change, but the response to it transformed everything. When the mind decides that pain is no longer a necessity, suffering evaporates. What remains is a calm acceptance of what is, paired with a determination to move forward. Reaction is powerful because it can magnify or diminish an experience. A minor inconvenience can become unbearable if you choose to dwell on it, replay it, and inflate it with meaning. Conversely, even a serious tragedy can be carried with grace if you decide to meet it with resilience. Your body may feel discomfort, your life may face disruption, but the suffering that lingers is always optional. Pain is what life delivers in a moment. Suffering is what your mind continues to create long after the moment has passed. By controlling your reaction, you eliminate unnecessary suffering and preserve your strength for solutions and growth. Consider a simple example. Someone insults you. The words themselves are harmless vibrations of sound. Yet if you accept them, replay them in your mind, and attach them to your self-image, you feel hurt. If instead you view the insult as nothing more than the reflection of the other person's state of mind, you are untouched. Their words carry no sting because you refuse to grant them authority over your emotions. The event is the same, but your interpretation determines whether you bleed or remain strong. Reactions also shape identity. Many people internalize events as if they define who they are. Losing a job becomes "I am a failure." Being left by a partner becomes "I am unlovable." Experiencing rejection becomes "I am not good enough." But when you separate reaction from event, you stop allowing external circumstances to define you. Losing a job simply means you are between opportunities. A breakup simply means compatibility was lacking, not that you are unworthy. Rejection simply means your offer did not match another's needs, not that you lack value. The mind's interpretation is what makes these events destructive. Remove the destructive interpretation, and the events become stepping stones instead of wounds. The ability to manage reaction is also deeply connected to emotional intelligence. When you control your emotional responses, you create space between stimulus and reaction. Instead of immediately lashing out, collapsing, or internalizing pain, you pause. In that pause lies power. You can choose to respond with patience, wisdom, or humor. The insult can be turned into a joke. The failure can be reframed as feedback. The loss can be honored as a chapter ending, while you look forward to the next. By mastering reaction, you turn every event into something useful instead of something damaging. This principle applies not only to negative events, but also to everyday stress. Traffic jams, delays, misunderstandings, and disappointments do not need to create suffering. They only become problems when the mind insists that life must always match expectations. When reality diverges from desire, resistance creates frustration. But when you accept reality as it is and choose to respond calmly, even small annoyances lose their power. In this way, your day becomes smoother, not because external events change, but because your reaction no longer fuels inner conflict. The truth that pain arises from reaction also liberates you from the need to control others. So often people exhaust themselves trying to make others act in a way that will not hurt them. They demand respect, fairness, or kindness, believing that if others behave correctly, they will be at peace. But peace does not come from controlling others. It comes from controlling yourself. You cannot govern how others act, but you can govern how you interpret and respond. Once you embrace this, you stop being fragile in the face of other people's moods or behavior. You become independent of their choices, because your reaction is your own. This understanding also empowers you to transform adversity into strength. When you choose to see difficulties as training for the mind, pain turns into purpose. Instead of saying, "This situation is hurting me," you say, "This situation is shaping me." the same fire that burns one person can forge another into steel, depending on reaction. Every difficulty, then, becomes a chance to practice mastery. Rather than asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "How can I use this to grow?" This shift in reaction changes everything. Even physical pain illustrates this principle. While pain sensations may be unavoidable, the suffering layered on top is optional. Athletes, meditators, and even patients enduring illness have demonstrated that by changing their mental reaction, they can reduce or even eliminate the torment of pain. The body may feel discomfort, but the mind refuses to magnify it with fear or resistance. This same principle applies to emotional pain. Loss, rejection, and disappointment may bring natural pangs of sadness, but whether those pangs become crippling suffering is entirely dependent on reaction. When you realize that events are powerless without your cooperation, you step into a new form of freedom. You no longer fear life, because you know that no matter what comes, you hold the power to interpret it in a way that leaves you unharmed. This is not denial, it is mastery. You face reality as it is, but you refuse to surrender your peace to any event. Every reaction is a choice, and in that choice lies either suffering or liberation. The day you take full ownership of your reactions is the day nobody and nothing can truly hurt you again. No one can take away your inner strength, because it is the one possession that does not exist in the external world, where theft and loss are possible. Everything material is subject to change. Fortunes can be wiped out in a single market crash. Possessions can be destroyed by fire or storm. Status can vanish with a shift in public opinion, and even relationships can dissolve unexpectedly. Yet through all of this, the one constant that remains untouchable is the character, willpower, and inner resilience you carry within yourself. Napoleon Hill emphasized that the true wealth of a person lies not in what they own, but in what they are. If all the outer trappings of life are taken away, the individual who has cultivated strength of spirit, discipline of thought, and confidence in their inner resources still stands tall, able to rebuild, recover, and even thrive again. When you reflect on the lives of great leaders, inventors, and visionaries, a common pattern emerges. Each endured loss, setbacks, betrayals, or failure, yet none of these external blows destroyed them permanently. Why? Because their inner reserves of strength could not be taken. Henry Ford failed several times before building his automotive empire. Thomas Edison conducted thousands of unsuccessful experiments before producing the light bulb. Abraham Lincoln lost elections and endured deep personal tragedies before becoming one of history's most respected presidents. In every case, external forces attempted to diminish them, but the strength of character within was beyond the reach of circumstance. Their resilience, faith, and determination were not possessions that could be stolen. They were inherent qualities that remained intact no matter what happened outside. To understand why inner strength is invulnerable, it is important to recognize its source. Inner strength is born of discipline, self-knowledge, and belief. These are not items you inherit by chance, nor are they given by others. They are cultivated through conscious effort, reflection, and persistence. Discipline arises when you consistently choose action over excuse, progress over stagnation. Self-knowledge develops when you examine your thoughts, your emotions, and your habits, understanding both your weaknesses and your strengths. Belief is forged when you confront difficulty and discover that you are capable of enduring far more than you imagined. None of these qualities can be transferred or stolen because they are woven into the very fabric of your being. They exist in the mind and spirit, not in the hands of others. When people place too much reliance on external factors for their sense of identity, they make themselves fragile. A person who builds their self-worth on wealth feels worthless when fortunes change. One who depends entirely on the approval of others collapses when criticism comes. Someone who ties identity to physical beauty or youth feels devastated when time alters their appearance. These are examples of fragile forms of strength because they can be taken away at any moment. But inner strength is not fragile, for it is not tied to what others give or take. It is a fire lit within you, and once burning, it cannot be extinguished by anything outside. You may experience sadness, disappointment, or difficulty, but the core of your resilience remains. This invulnerability is what makes inner strength the foundation of freedom. A person who knows that nothing external can truly diminish them is free to live boldly, to take risks, and to pursue dreams without being paralyzed by the fear of loss. They understand that while money, reputation, or relationships may change, the ability to think, to adapt, and to persevere is always theirs. This freedom creates courage, and courage fuels action. Action, in turn, generates results, which reinforce the sense of inner strength. The cycle repeats, building an ever stronger conviction that no matter what happens, one's true power remains untouched. Life will inevitably present moments that test this strength. Loved ones may leave, businesses may fail, health may falter. But even here, the core of resilience proves its value. When everything seems lost, the inner voice that whispers, "I can endure this, I can rise again," becomes the lifeline. People often underestimate their capacity to overcome until they are forced to face hardship. It is in those moments that the untouchable nature of inner strength reveals itself. You discover that while circumstances may strip away comforts, they cannot strip away your will, and in that discovery, you often uncover levels of resilience far greater than you knew you possessed. Forging inner strength also requires a mindset that refuses to be defined by temporary defeat. Napoleon Hill himself spoke often about temporary defeat as a necessary stepping stone toward success. He emphasized that the only true failure is the failure to try again. Here lies another layer of invulnerability. When you see every loss as temporary and every defeat as a lesson, you transform what could have been destruction into empowerment. Nobody can harm you permanently when you refuse to stop moving forward. The blows of life may bend you, but they cannot break you unless you surrender. Strength, therefore, is not the absence of hardship, but the refusal to let hardship define your destiny. Another reason no one can take away your inner strength is because it is deeply rooted in choice. Each day, you decide how to think, how to feel, and how to act. Others may influence or attempt to manipulate you, but the final choice always remains yours. Even in extreme situations where freedom of action is restricted, the freedom of thought remains untouchable. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, wrote about this truth in his Reflections on Life in Concentration Camps. He observed that while everything else could be stripped from a person, the freedom to choose one's attitude remained. That freedom is the essence of inner strength, and it cannot be taken by force. It can only be surrendered voluntarily, and those who refuse to surrender it remain unbroken. This understanding changes how you interact with the world. When you know your inner strength is untouchable, you stop being defensive, anxious, or fearful about what others may do to you. Criticism becomes less threatening because it does not alter who you are. Loss becomes less terrifying because you know you can rebuild. Betrayal becomes less devastating because you realize your worth is not dependent on another's loyalty. You carry yourself with a quiet confidence, knowing that your most valuable possession, your inner power, remains yours alone. This calm assurance often inspires respect from others, because true strength is always recognized, even when unspoken. Cultivating inner strength requires practice, and like a muscle, it grows through consistent use. Every time you overcome fear, every time you face difficulty without breaking, Every time you persist despite doubt, you are adding to your reserves of resilience. Over the years, this accumulation of inner victories creates a fortress of character that no one can breach. And once you realize that this fortress exists, you no longer fear the storms of life. You welcome them as opportunities to test and strengthen the walls further, knowing that every trial leaves you stronger than before. In the end, inner strength is not something fragile that can be given or taken. It is a permanent part of who you are once cultivated. It lives in your thoughts, in your will, and in your ability to choose how to respond to the world. Others may harm your body, challenge your resources, or disrupt your plans, but they cannot touch the core of your being unless you hand them the key. That is why no one can ever take away your inner strength. It belongs to you alone, and it grows stronger each time you choose to exercise it.